Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Electro Engineering Insights. I'm your host, Brian, and today we're reconnecting with a familiar face, Stephen Hawes.
Hey, Brian.
Now, Stephen's the innovative mind behind Opulo and the famous Lumen PNP. That's an open source desktop pick and place machine. And the last time we caught up was at Electronica in 2022. And at your age, you age in 2 years. At my age, I look pretty much the same, except I didn't have the beard at the time. Welcome back, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm great, Brian. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
It's awesome. I wanted to catch up. I understand you won't be at Electronica this year, so it's great to see you again. That's the last time we had you on.
Yeah.
So we'll be seeing what Stephen has been up to, including his latest on the Lumen PNP, new feeder developments, and some unique experiences he's had along the way. But before we dive into our conversation, let me tell you about our awesome sponsor, BeagleBoard. BeagleBoard.org Foundation. It's a USA-based nonprofit corporation that exists to provide education in and collaboration around the design and use of open source hardware and software in embedded computing. Now, BeagleBoard's new board, the BeagleY AI, is a low-cost open source community-supported development platform, which I'll show you in a second, for professionals and for hobbyists. So the BeagleY AI has a Raspberry Pi compatible form factor, which is always good, enabling a shared accessory ecosystem. BeagleBoard.org provides Debian Linux, Zephyr, and MicroPython software images, and the ability to run artificial intelligence applications. Now, speaking of BeagleBoard, our giveaway today, you can win one of 3 BeagleY AI single board computers. Now, if you're into a bit of the ASMR thing, I've been fortunate to have one of those that I've been given to review, which is great. We're giving away 3 of these. It's an affordable open source single board computer with 4 TOPS of AI processing power. Perfect for your next AI or embedded project. It's equipped with advanced connectivity and display options, which makes it ideal for robotics and automotive applications. So yeah, we've got 3 of these ready to find new homes. We'll tell you the code word for our giveaway later. As always, the giveaway page is there. There you see Stephen's lovely face before the beard, and I'll give you the code word later for entering that competition.
It's generous to call it a
beard. Well, I guess if you don't have to shave as often as I do, that's a blessing. Elect won't be a fan. So let's dive in, Stephen. You've always been a fan of open source hardware. I mean, a lot of people want to be entrepreneurs and become the next billionaire and keep their secrets, keep their cards close to their chest. What made you passionate about keeping everything that you do open and still somehow manage to make a buck out of it?
I think there's a couple things that have led to mostly everything that I've done being open source. The first is that the reason I'm able to do any of it is because of a very large array of existing open source projects. Like all the stuff that I have learned about electronics and embedded development has come from existing open source projects. So it's a bit of a, closing the circle a little bit, I think is part of the ethos. And there's also the aspect of it that it is objectively beneficial. I think there's a lot of people that think that, if you don't have a patent and you don't close your source, no one's going to pay you for the thing that you do. And I just don't think that's true. It's just not. If you have an open source software project, it's a little trickier because it's effectively free to compile the source into a useful thing. Hardware is pretty hard to compile, to use the same phrase. So the service of compiling that hardware into something for people that just want a thing that works, they don't want to have to go source all of it. It's a pretty good model. And for cloning, which is, I think, mainly what people are talking about in regards to this, the reason that we're making the stuff that we make is not to become a billionaire. It's to make a useful thing. So like if other people see this and go, oh, cool, let me go and make a pick and place myself. All ships rise with the rising tides. It makes it better for everybody to have more distributed manufacturing and have more tools and have other people trying to go into this stuff that we can learn from and make our thing better. And like, it depends on what your goal is. And if our goal is trying to solve that problem, it's just objectively the best way to do it, in my opinion. So a couple things, definitely an ethos, definitely like part of what I think is important and the reason that I want to do it, and kind of thanking all of the existing projects for helping me be able to start this whole thing, and all the people that have contributed to it so far. And also it works great. It works really well for us too. So a lot of reasons, a lot of reasons.
Yeah, and open source is a relatively new term. I mean, it goes back maybe 30 years ago. Before that, if you did a business, you kept your secrets close to your heart. So it's amazing that this still works. But, I would pay for a service that takes care of the details for me, and I can buy it directly from you instead of me having to faff and go to your GitHub and download the code and flash the firmware. And it's a lot easier when you do that for us.
And another interesting thing about it too is that when you're a builder of the Lumen PNP, the pick and place that we make, you are building it for the first time. We've built it thousands of times. We know how to build it pretty well at this point. So like, it's also going to be a better end result because we have all the QC processes. We've learned all the hard lessons. Like, we know how to put the thing together well. So if everyone building it is building it for the first time, they're not going to be as reliable or good. It's still important that people should be able to do it, but most people, especially for a pick and place, just want a tool. They want a thing they can buy, they set up, and it just builds their boards. They're not looking for a project.
Yeah, and they can know all the details and they can fix it if they need to. I don't know if you watch Lewis Rossman on YouTube.
Yes, I'm familiar with Lewis,
yeah. Big proponent of the right to repair, which means you can take it apart and you can fix it, and there's no manufacturer looking over your shoulder and trying to control the license for that. So
yeah,
that is great.
Yeah.
And then we discovered you and had you at Electronica, as I showed that thumbnail from one of our YouTube videos.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you?
That was crazy. I had been in a previous job. I had done quite a bit of travel, but I'd never been to Germany, and I've never been to quite that scale of a show before. Electronica is incredible. For those that had the opportunity to attend, it's an astounding event. It is one of the biggest collections of people for a singular purpose is pretty broad, but still it's really just an astounding event. We learned a lot from going. I think one of the best values for us going out, and at that point we were 3 or 4 people. Like, we were still very, very tiny. We're not tremendously bigger than that now, but we still are quite a bit bigger than that. That it was a big thing for us to like kind of stop work for a couple of weeks to go out to Germany and do this. But we learned so much about what people want in a pick and place machine. Like, we were convinced that it made no sense for prototyping. Like, oh, if you have a pick and place in house, it doesn't make sense to do it for a small number of boards. You need to be making a few hundred. And we kept talking to people at the show that would come up to us. They're like, this would be great for prototyping. And we're like, no, like, we don't really think that's the case. We think it's really for, maybe like 200 or 300 boards is really where it starts to make sense. And they're like, that's a small prototyping run for us. How many do you make for a prototyping run? And we're like, oh, small batch production is literally a prototype run in big companies. And we didn't have the exposure to know that until we were able to just go and be at the booth and have people come up to us and talk to us about how it might be useful. And I think that's really where shows like that shine, is teaching you the things you didn't know. If you're going to answer a question, you might get the answer, but you're just going to learn more about your industry going there, and and it makes it really hard to make the justification for the money and time, because if you're not solving a specific problem, it's hard to justify the return on investment of going to an event, but you still have to do it because you're going to learn stuff you didn't even know that you should have known, So it's a great event. It's so cool. I'm really envious that you're going. I really wish we were going this year.
Yeah, if I could fund you, I would, because you're always a great, very enthusiastic guy to have at these events.
Thank you.
As I was saying to you out of the show, you're one of those guys, if I say to you, are you passionate about the future of open source? You won't say yes, and leave it at that. You'll have something to say, which makes my job easier.
Yeah, your job becomes hard in a different way, because you have to tell me to shut up after a while.
Well, we only have an hour. I'll just mute you. Sounds like US debate prep, actually.
That's a great backup option.
So now this Lumen pick and place, it is $2,000 if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
So it's not something I could justify having on my desktop. I'm still the guy who does everything by hand, and I come from through-hole components. In fact, you won't have seen this, but there was a time I thought I could remove components by using a reflow oven, but the reflow oven, I thought, I was a teenager. Please forgive me. It was a microwave oven, so I ended up with this. And it smelled great for a couple of days.
Did it break the microwave?
No, that microwave is still going. I think like 35 years later or something.
Are you using it for food still?
Yeah, I had to wait a couple of days. I'm still alive, but yeah, the toxic fumes were another story.
Sure.
But the reason I bring that example in is because, yeah, doing things by hand and trying to find a workaround, which clearly this one didn't work. And other than that, I'm doing things by hand. But $2,000, how is that working for small to medium enterprises? I mean, it must make a difference on some small factory floors.
Yeah, it's what we found is there's definitely a lower limit to where, like, if you have to populate 20, 30 parts, you're just going to grab the tweezers and you're going to put it together that way. But there is a point, and it's a pretty gray delineation of like at what point it does make sense, because there's a lot of variables. It's how long does it take you to hand populate? How long is the job set up? How many parts are there per board? How many boards do you need? The speed of the machine. There's a lot of variables involved. So it's an interesting thing figuring out at what point does it make sense. But if you have a board with a lot of parts, like for example, the Lumen PNP motherboard, if I have to populate some, it takes me forever to do it by hand. So where it really becomes useful is you set up the machine for a given design once, and you can do a batch of 10 of a certain PCB rev trivially easy. You just slap them on and off they go. And then if you have a design rev, slight change in the PCB, you can get those boards as quick as, 2-day turnaround for some of the really, really, really fast PCB shops. You put them on the machine. There's effectively no setup. You load a different population job, maybe swap a component or two, and you're off to the races again, making another 10. And or 20 or 50 or whatever. So it's really when you start to get to those numbers or that amount of time where the setup cost is easily offset by how much time you save by having a machine just do it for you. It's great. So that's really where we've seen it be super useful, especially for, prototyping runs. A lot of people also pilot their mass production runs. So ultimately, if they're making, I don't know, 100,000 units a year, 50,000 units a year, they may not be doing it on the Lumen PNP, but they will run an internal production run of like 100 units to validate that the design makes sense and works at scale. And like, it's not some nominal one or two one-offs that they know happen to work, but with some variation, it's going to be stable. And that de-risks their production tremendously. So that's really where we found it to be super useful. We actually use it for our PCB production. So we use the Lumen PNP to make all the boards in the Lumen PNP. Which is really fun because we get to use the machine all the time. We know what we need to be working on. We know what's great about it. Like, we're our own user. So it keeps us really close to like, the next thing that we want to do to make the process easier. But, at a certain point, we'll probably outgrow it. We're rapidly approaching that scale where it's like, yeah, it's meant to be this kind of jump. We have some users that use them for like 20,000 boards a year or like crazy, crazy quantities.
Wow.
But, it just depends. It depends on what your board is, what's important to you, the scale of what you're making. Do you need to make it in-house? Do you iterate quickly? That also makes it really, really nice to have it in-house. So there's a lot of different things that go into that decision, but there's a gap, and that's what we're trying to fill.
Awesome. I'll ask you more about that in a second. I just want to say good morning to Paul, Filio. Good morning, everyone. And I want to encourage everyone in the chat to drop your questions and comments. Have you guys had experience with doing stuff, placing parts with machine? I haven't. I do everything by hand. And I haven't grown into automation on that scale yet, but Stephen's about ready to grow out of it. Now, in terms of open source, I've worked in other companies where the executives, the suits as we call them, were very suspicious of open source. They ran Windows on their PCs and they were like, what is this Linux? It's open, it's free. No, we don't want free. We want Microsoft. We get the support. Yep. When was the last time you phoned Microsoft to help you with something? You know. Meanwhile, the whole backbone of the company, the e-commerce system, is running on Ubuntu on a Linux server. So,
Yeah.
do you have any, or should I say, have you had in the past any resistance to someone working with open source product rather than, you know, some very much more expensive proprietary product?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bad rep that some open source stuff gets, and I think part of that is because the projects that feel a little discombobulated and not well structured and pushed forward don't necessarily have one person or organization that says this is the direction this project should go in, and having that person or entity that says no, this is where we're trying to get, and pushing that to that point helps keep things streamlined and have the result be really good. Sometimes open source projects, when they're, you know, a little bit more distributed and there isn't as explicit of a vision, they falter in that way and they don't quite come together. Or they do, and it just takes longer. You know, it takes a while for the community to kind of see what that's going to be, and then everyone kind of collectively brings it there. So sometimes that's kind of the rep that some of these projects will get. But I mean, look at something like Inkscape. Like Inkscape in comparison to Photoshop 10 years ago, 5 years ago, was night and day difference on usability, because Adobe has a vision about exactly what it should look like, and Inkscape was less of that, and also less resources. I mean, there's many variables here, but now Inkscape is really beautiful. Like, it's really coming together to that point, but it just takes a little longer. So I think there's a bit of that understanding there, but having there be an organization and people who are on staff full-time working on trying to make this open source design better negates that. You know, there's a vision of exactly what we want this machine to do and what we want it to be. So I think that goes against some of that a little bit. There's definitely people that view open source as like, oh, it's going to be a project and stuff. And like, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can have a beautiful open source piece of hardware that is also a sorted thing and happens to be open. It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting balance.
It is, and it is a balance, and no disrespect to my friends at Microsoft. If you want to sponsor the show, we still welcome you. I'm running this on Windows on a 75-inch 8K screen, and Windows works for me in terms of my day-to-day business.
Yep.
I guess it depends on the community, because in this business, we have a lot of users and contributors at Elector who don't want to use proprietary software. So we'll say, can you send it as a Microsoft Word document? And they'll send an ODT file instead.
Yep.
Or can you Photoshop it? They'll use GIMP instead.
Yep.
So it is definitely a community which understands open source, but community and industry, there's always an overlap. And we try and find a balance between hobbyists like me and people who are working in industry, because people who are working in industry oftentimes come from hobbyist backgrounds and they have a stack of Elector magazines. Hopefully they keep them. And speaking of community, SuperCons. I've been dying to go to a maker fair, but I haven't had the opportunity because I'm here in South Africa. We don't have a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
There was just one in Hanover in Europe, but you've done a couple of them. How do you find that? I mean, you have a very effervescent personality, so you must get along great with the people there and have a ball of a time at these events.
They're great. I love these events so much. I'm actually an introvert. Like, I recharge by being by myself. But when I'm in an event like that, I can't.
No ways.
But
you an introvert? I'm an introvert. You're not an introvert.
I mean, that's how I recharge. But like, if I'm in an event like that, I'm gonna be outward like that. It's too fun to not do it that way for how my brain works. So yeah, those events are incredible. They're just the best. Maker fairs. I went to one Bay Area Maker Fair and probably half a dozen of the New York City Maker Fairs. After I went to college, and then they stopped doing the New York one, which was like, that was the big one I really liked. But I've been to a ton of different of the mini maker fairs. Hackaday SuperCon is one that I'm usually going to, which is smaller and a little more like embedded focused and less like broad makery. And then Open Sauce is a great event that William Osman, who's a YouTuber, he put this on because he was kind of looking for what Maker Faire, when the big flagship ones stopped happening, he kind of wanted that to come back. And so it's kind of a mix between Maker Faire and VidCon. So it's a bunch of like maker YouTubers, and it also you can bring in a thing just like Maker Faire and show it off. It is an incredible event. It happens in San Francisco every summer. Just the last July, I think it was the second year. He's doing a great job with it. It's such a cool event. So Open Sauce that's kind of been my new event. It's great. It's like, I cannot recommend it enough. If you have the means to go next summer, go to Open Sauce. It's such a cool thing. A lot of cool people go to it.
So what you're saying is it's a good use of my research time, and that Elector should send me next summer.
Yes, you officially can. It's my word. I think it's a valid business expense to send Brian to San Francisco for Open Sauce next summer. I agreed with that statement.
Awesome. Now, it's been a couple of years, so I'm just going to bring up your GitHub. This thing is crazy. You've got 310 forks and 2.3 thousand stars, and a lot going on there.
Yeah.
A lot of updates, a lot of improvements.
Mm-hmm.
What have you been up to for the last 2 years? What's changed with the Lumen PNP?
A lot of stuff has changed. Like just so many things have been in iteration. What I'll say right now is that maybe about a week from right now, you might want to check back in because we'll have something new, maybe. But a ton of new stuff that we've been working on. What you're looking at now is a release, the 3.2.2 release, which is our most recent release. We kind of release hardware like software because we make all our boards in-house, and because we do our we 3D print most of the parts, we can change really quickly. So we can kind of release like software at a really quick cadence. And part of what is kind of a pain in the butt for doing a hardware release is getting all of the assets ready. So there you can see all the assets, all the things that are like attached to it. We have in GitHub a ton of custom scripts that, because we use FreeCAD and KiCad for all of our designs, you can open an instance of it in like an Ubuntu server, speaking of Ubuntu servers, and you can actually load all the files and automatically export and render the entire bill of materials. So if you go to that Lumen PNP BOM zip folder, that is actually a zip that has an HTML file that's automatically generated. It's a website that shows you the bill of materials for that specific version of the Lumen. It will even render a picture of every, you have it up there, it is. So every single one of those photos is literally rendered automatically. It exports an STL, opens them in OpenSCAD, actually, that's what we use for the rendering.
Wow. Saves
the PNG, generates the web page, and gives you instructions on like weird printability, how many you need for one instance of the Lumen, whether some of the parts are optional, a link to go buy them either from us or a second source, or wherever community backed place there are. So this has kind of been a bit of a hot glue, putting scripts together kind of thing that I've been working on with our dev team and the community over the past few years. And now we're kind of putting it into a formal tool where anyone can use our tool, and it just very easily exports every single part in a nice, clean way to make sharing open hardware a lot easier. So a lot of what we've been doing is tooling. Like, it's not just necessarily working on the machine, but it's working on like making open hardware easier for people to engage in, which is an interesting thing. We're building kind of tools for ourselves, but also sharing them back out with other people so that they can benefit from them and kind of do the same thing that we're doing, because it's working pretty well for us, and we think other people could do it too. So yeah, this has been a really fun thing. Yeah. I love messing with this, the scripting for generating this stuff.
Well, it's crazy. And this is all automatically generated, you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all generated. You can click a button in GitHub and it just takes the repository, pulls it down, runs a bunch of scripts, and generates this whole thing. And all the STLs get exported. It generates all the Gerbers to buy the PCBs. Like, you don't have to do anything. It just barfs it all out for you automatically. Yeah, it's really fun.
Well, I'm a big believer in automation. I've been in other industries where the same task was being done over and over again, and I've automated it all with APIs and, for example, uploading to YouTube. I'm out of that industry, but people are just using that same system and still working and still churning. And exactly how I imagine this. If Stephen Hawes decides he wants to go into Hollywood, the scripts will still be running generating these things automatically, which is great.
I don't know about Hollywood, but yeah, ideally they're as long as there isn't a breaking API update, ideally they're still just going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's take a couple of questions here. We've got McDonald Ibekwe. Judging by the surname McDonald, you might be on the same continent that I am, which is Africa. Please give your roadmap to becoming an embedded system engineer.
Well, I may not be the best person to ask about this because I took a weird way to it. My approach to doing it was, as I'm sure many people will say, starting with Arduino, because Arduino is such an incredibly easy way to start understanding the process of writing code for a microcontroller. And then beyond that, and once you kind of get your feet wet with existing boards, exactly, something like that, an Arduino Uno. I got a kit like this when I was in college and started plunking around with writing some Arduino code. And then once you kind of wrap your head around what that process looks like, starting to design and taking like modules and connecting them together and using a SPI peripheral or using an I2C peripheral and understanding what that looks like, then you can start kind of taking all those modules and putting them into what's effectively a PCB that is one big breakout board, which is doing everything you were doing with your breadboard already, all the jumper wires, except you're just putting it into a PCB and soldering them directly on. And now you're kind of playing with the idea of a circuit board. And then you can look at the schematics for those modules, see how they're designing those. And then instead of buying that module, let's say it's an I2S microphone. Let's say that's the module that you buy from Adafruit or something. Their schematics are open source and available. You can see how they went and designed it. And then you can take that design and use it to reference your own design on the PCB. And then you can start putting your own components on there. And as you go through this process of like, you start with fully pre-made kind of black boxes of logic, and you start to break down those boxes and you start to be able to do more and more customization and put them onto your own custom PCB. And at the end of it, you can do whatever you want. It is a completely open field of every silicon design ever that you can get your hands on one way or another is fair game. And you can learning how to read a data sheet. It all just comes from taking these big blocks that you can kind of plug together in simple ways and start to break them apart and look at how they work and start to integrate them yourself into your own custom design. For firmware, I'm probably also not the best person to ask. I'm actually a mechanical engineer from schooling with a minor in computer science, but no formal electrical engineering training. I did in careers after that, jobs that I had afterwards. But going through that process, I think is a lot of exposure. Like having a big thorny problem and getting really good at Googling is most of how I got to where I am. And then some of the bigger things of like, how do I structure a big firmware project? How do I go about like architecting this? I think the best way for that is talking to people who are more knowledgeable than you. Most stuff you can get by through Googling. But for example, this is the Lumen PNP feeder. This is what goes onto the front of the Lumen and takes a component tape. The tape goes right in there, the tape that has all the parts in it, and it serves the part up with this wheel. It'll just serve the parts up for the nozzle to pick them from right there. So this is one of the things that we make and sell, also open source. And this PCB, which is actually part of this structure here, has a microcontroller in it. It talks back to the host. And this firmware is complicated. There's a lot going on in this firmware, and I wasn't really sure how to structure it, but there's a lot of people in the open source community, in the Lumen PNP community, who are orders of magnitude smarter than I am and said, Stephen, you should probably do it this way. Look at the pluses and minuses of doing it this way. And once they kind of point me in the right direction, then I can go and continue to Google, Google my way to success, really. So that was my path. And that's what worked really, really well for me. A lot of kind of beating my head against a wall, searching things. Formal schooling is probably not a bad way to start, but I had effectively none for embedded. And it worked out pretty well for me. I'm not the best embedded engineer. I'm all right. But it's, our open source community and the people who are quite a bit smarter than I am that check my work, do a lot of the original work themselves. These people have advanced degrees in this stuff. So I may not be the best person to ask, but that was the path I took at the very least, to, being able to at least be a little dangerous when it comes to to embedded development.
Well, you say you may not be the best person to ask, but looking at McDonald's question, when he put embedded system engineer with caps, that was intimidating to me, but you actually answered it well, starting with Arduino. I realized that I am an embedded system engineer because I have engineered embedded systems, but for myself, not to make money, not for a boss, but you got to start somewhere, which is great that you brought up the Arduino.
Mhm.
And speaking to people that are smarter than you, thanks for joining us, Stephen. Especially in the mechanical arena. I have no skills with mechanical engineering. I can make a microcontroller do anything, but I'll probably break an arm, a robotics arm, if I try to lift an egg. I'm terrible at that stuff.
Everyone has their fortes.
Well, that's why collaboration is important and community is important.
Hugely, yep.
Paul asks, what funding models can sustainably support developing and maintaining open source hardware projects?
This is a really tricky question. We actually, here at Opulo, we started a podcast about making open source hardware and manufacturing it and designing it and community stuff. And we had an episode about this a few weeks ago, specifically about this. It's called Open Hardware Manufacturing Podcast. Little pun on, resistance. But this is we had a whole episode talking about this. It's a tricky thing because there's a lot of ways that you can try to do it. But it's hard. So anyway, I think it is easier than software though, because software, like I said at the top of the show, it's free to compile effectively. So anyone could just download the source and build it themselves. And it's hard to have that extra thing that charging for in some way without closing some of your source. It's harder to find that model, in my opinion. With hardware, building and shipping the hardware, I think is the easiest and cleanest way to make money from it. You're providing a great service. A lot of people might want it to be open source because they can hack on it. They know it's infinitely repairable. They know they can always get replacement parts because the design is open. They can just get them made. It's not the longevity of the product is not at all related to the longevity of the company. And that's a great thing. So a lot of people will go that way. That's the way I've gone with Opulo. So that's a big one. You can also, this one's really tricky and like fraught, but you can go the path of raising venture capital, but that's kind of a hamster wheel. So if you raise money and you go down that path, they're expecting some kind of returns, and you can make money doing that for a while, but at some point they're going to expect an exit. They're going to expect an IPO. There's going to be some liquidation event that they want to happen. And you have to make money some other way there to get out of that. So that's tricky. And also, depending on the investor, they may not be aligned with you wanting to keep it open. We got really lucky we raised a little bit of money, comparatively a little bit of money through Safe Notes, which is a funding model that means we can always choose to keep it open source, which is great. And that was really important to me. So it depends on how you want to go with that. Some people, me included, actually, for the first 2 years of the project, year and a half of the project, was Patreon. Like, a lot of people will just pay to support someone who's doing this thing that feels like a public service, even if you're not selling it, but you're just supporting it. You can donate to the Voron project, and that helps them go to events and helps fund development and stuff. And like, just donation fundraising kind of approach is also pretty valid for maintaining it. It can be hard though, because a lot of people won't do it necessarily just because the source is available. Like, I think a lot of people subscribe to my Patreon because I had videos that I was making, and it's normal for YouTube to lead to Patreon, but just for an open source developer, it's fraught. It's like few and far between for people that make a fair amount of money doing that kind of support. So that can be a trickier one too. But those are the main ones. Some people will like gate project or like certain parts of files behind a paywall, and like, that's fine. There's no shame or negativity in wanting to keep your thing closed source. I think it's fine to do that if you choose to. The thing that becomes tricky is keeping it open and then being like, oh, never mind. Now I've gotten all the value from the community and now I'm going to close it. That's not cool. that's I don't like that. But, if you want to keep it closed or you want to pick that thing, I mean, I'd encourage you to open it up, but it's your choice. It's your design. It's your material. You can choose what you want to do with it. So you can also gate some things behind paywall, gate support behind paywall. Like maybe you make the source open, but if you want to have somebody, hey, I want to build one, can you help me with it? Sure, I charge X amount an hour for support and help you go through the process of doing it. Maybe it's that. There's a lot of creative ways to go about doing it, but I think compiling it, like actually making it and putting it out into the world, is the cleanest, easiest way to help get hardware in people's hands, get them using it, getting them giving you feedback. It's an obvious value add, and your source can be like unequivocally open if you so choose. And it's also the one I know best, so I can recommend it because that's what we do.
Yeah, and you've just given 5 years of experience in 5 minutes, 2-minute answer, more like developing and maintaining open source hardware projects.
Yeah.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to note that we've gone past the halfway stage, so I will take this opportunity to give the code word for our giveaway. Remember, we're giving away 3 of these. That's the BeagleBoard, the BeagleY AI board from BeagleBoard.org. And the code word for this giveaway is Beagle. No surprises there, but we do keep it under wraps to keep you guys watching at least until halfway through the show. McDonald, I guessed that you were in Africa. Yes, he's in Lagos, Nigeria. So greeting from Johannesburg, South Africa, to my fellow African. Now, we talked about maker fairs earlier, and Paul has a question here about these days, how important are maker fairs, like the Bay Area one that you mentioned, and similar events to drawing attention and or support to OS hardware work? Is it just a party for you, or do you come away with actual KPIs, if you will?
This is a great question, because it's very hard for me to give a objective answer to this because I have such a subjective view on it, because I love going to these events. So like, I feel like when they come up, it feels like fun and it feels like it's something I'm doing for fun, but I also make a lot of good connections for the Lumen PNP project and, get advice on how to do things. So I think it depends on your project, and it depends on how you're going about using your time at the event. If you go to table and show off a lot of stuff that you have, that can be good because it helps seed to people like, hey, this is a project, this is something you could be aware of. But I think there's a lot more effective ways to share what you're doing with the world. Social media is infinitely reachable, and you can do it from home and don't have to wait for an event. Like, that's the way to get the word out, I think, like drawing attention. But I really think they're more for kind of like what we were talking about with electronica. It's more about making connections with other people doing similar things. Like, most of the people that do decide to go to these events they're really engaged in this kind of thing. They're building their own thing, most likely, especially something like SuperCon where it's much smaller. Like, you're already creating quite a lot of stuff. So these are the kind of people that you want to be connected with if you have your project like this as well. A lot of media is also recorded at these events. A lot of YouTubers go make videos at these events. So being there and potentially having there be really big video for us was Thomas Sandlatterer, who rebranded to Made with Layers, a 3D printing channel. We were at an East Coast Rep Festival in, 2022. Yeah, it was that fall. We did a million events, including going to Electronica. And he did a video about the Lumen PNP. And it was great. It got a ton of word out to his whole following about the machine and about the fact this is even a thing. So there's a lot of second order effects. Like, the people that learn about it at the event, maybe it may not be quite as prolific, but the connections that you make, the people that you get in touch with at these things are like unspeakably valuable. And the media that's generated at the event is also pretty important as well. So I'd say they're definitely worth it. Like, I go to every year, I'm like, I don't want to leave Pittsburgh. That's where we're based. I want to just stay here and work. That's kind of my approach every new year. And inevitably I end up going to like 5 or 6 events, and I fly all over the place for these kinds of things. So, and you know what? It's beneficial. I do it because I know that it makes a lot of sense to do it, but yeah, it can be exhausting too. It's a lot to go do that. I think it's still worth it though. It's worth it to make those connections.
Yeah, exhausting, especially if you call yourself an introvert. You definitely need time to recharge after the event.
Yes. When I get home, I'm like, I'm never traveling again. And then 3 weeks later, it's like, oh, no, I'm going to this thing now.
DIY guy Chris says hi. And hello to a fellow African again. Go Africa. And Dom Conti with the wave of the hand. Now, you do not that many YouTube videos. You know, you're not as prolific on YouTube as a lot of people are. If I look at the last 12 videos, the 12th one was 2 years ago. And yet you seem to gain a lot of traction, get a lot of attention from people. Is this core to your model about getting attention? Besides going to fairs, maker fairs, you said social media helps a lot. Is this part of it?
Yeah. And I think also part of it too is that when I started doing YouTube in like early 2019 or late 2018, I made a video every 2 weeks without exception for like 2 years or something like that, 2.5 years. It was a lot. And then when it started turning into a company, my time is spoken for by a company. I have employees. I have to run payroll. I have to facilitate production. I have to scrub the office bathrooms every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Like I have to do these things to keep the wheels moving on this machine. So videos are few and far between because, it's turned into something else. So I think a lot of it is, I had a real strong start there. And then now when I post a video, it's something I'm really proud of. And it's something that I can really stand by. And it also has a bit of a, oh my gosh, there's a new Stephen video. Hopefully that's what people think and not, wow, this guy finally decided to upload again. So I'm hoping that that's more of the energy behind it. So yeah, I think that's mostly it. I wish I made more. And I think we're kind of getting to a point in the company now where we're growing enough that I'm able to take a lot of the stuff that I do every day. I'm still tremendously an individual contributor. I run the company, but also I do a lot of engineering work. I do media work. I do, taking pictures and, Photoshop stuff and video editing. And like, I do a lot of stuff as a contributor as well. And I'm hoping we get to this point in the next year or so where I can hand some of that stuff off and I can get back to making videos because I really love it. And I think it's a good way to get the word out about what we're doing. So yeah, it's been interesting trying to balance making these videos and also keep this, behemoth of a responsibility moving along. It's hard. It's hard to do it.
Yeah. And as a subscriber to your channel, I realized I hadn't seen anything from you in a while. And I didn't realize it's because you haven't put anything out in a while. I haven't done an audit until today, of course.
Yeah, I think like 2 months-ish, because we had our print farm was really hard to upload files to. And again, this is spawned out of a thing that the company needed, where I was like, okay, I need to make it easier to upload a bunch of stuff to our print farm. So I made a tool that connects via FTP to all of our printers, and it takes every file in a folder and just uploads it to every single one that we have. And I made an open source project and I pushed it out and I, had made a contributing guidelines and all these things about it to make it its own project. But it came out of necessity from the company. So yeah, it's weird. It's really been challenging to try and transition from like my only thing is making YouTube videos to like now I run a company and I still have a channel with 50,000 subscribers that I don't make videos for nearly as often as I used to. It's weird. It's a weird thing.
It is. And you've certainly got the talent to be a manager, which has been challenging for me at times. I like to do things, to tell other people to do that and make sure they get it right and then have to deal with them when they don't do it right. That is a challenge. And how have you found that, especially as an introvert? You've got to face up to people who sometimes meet your expectations, sometimes exceed them, but sometimes they let you down. How do you deal with that?
It can be tricky especially because usually I do have a pretty like chipper, outward positive demeanor most of the time. If I'm not, it feels very jarring to a lot of people. So I have to be pretty aware of how I, come across when I am communicating that kind of stuff and let people know that, we have a pretty strong policy here that like there's no finger pointing. And mistakes are going to happen and part of the game. Like if you mess up, there's two things that we do. We figure out how it happened so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again. And then we put a plan in place to make sure it doesn't happen. I mess up all the time. I make mistakes all the time. We're human. Like we're not computers. I have this joke of like, I have inside our heads, it's not a computer, it's an electric meatball. That's how I think about our brains. It's not a hard, rigid thing. It's going to make mistakes. It's not deterministic. And that's okay. So it's just about finding ways to improve the process to make sure that those things don't happen in the future. So figuring out how to get the messaging across to that and letting my team know if something goes wrong, that like we need to change it, but I'm not angry. I just want to find a good solution. And I want us all to, have a good way forward to continue to accomplish our goal. That is a hard thing to do, nuanced. It's a challenging task to do. I had done some management stuff before Opulo, not a ton, but I had a little experience with like running teams. But this has been a whole different ball game. Like managing a much larger team than I've ever had to deal with before. I've learned a lot, and it's incredibly humbling. And every time I'm like, yeah, I feel like I'm getting the hang of this, something comes up and I'm like, oh wow, okay, how are we going to do this? What's going to be the process for this kind of thing? It's really interesting. I do like it a lot. I've been happy with how much I've, enjoyed diving into the managerial side of things. I'm very similar to you. I love the individual contributor stuff. But I also like the management. I like, coming up with a plan with a team, scrambling the jets. Everyone goes off and does their thing and, having a game plan. I love that part of it too. But it took a while to get my footing on that one, and it still will.
Yeah. That's a good point. I never thought of how the demeanor when you walk into the boss's office depends on the boss's general demeanor. If the boss is a serious guy and you walk in and you're in trouble and he's serious, well, that's serious. But I just pictured walking into Stephen's office and Stephen is looking serious. I think my soul just left my body.
Right. My dad has this great line that I think about a lot, which is, he very intentionally does not swear very often. Because when he does, it now means something. It's like the boy who cried wolf analogy. It's like if you have a change in that way, it speaks to how you're feeling about that thing. And I need to be careful about that because I don't want to metaphorically swear and, seem downtrodden and stuff and people think that there's something very wrong when I'm just being serious. Like nothing's wrong. Everything's okay. I'm just not, in the very moment. So yeah, that's been an interesting thing to learn, like seeing how people interpret that and like, how do I communicate that? Maybe I just be bubbly all the time, or they learn that maybe that's just not how I am all the time. That's a huge part of it. And it's something I never would have thought, like, I'm going to make pick and places and start a pick and place company. How my demeanor is all the time based on how people interpret it. Not the last thing I would have thought about going into this, but it's something I now think about constantly. So yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of what I used to think of comedians much years ago. I've grown up now, but I used to think, okay, the guy's funny on stage. You meet him in real life, now he's going to entertain you. He's going to make you laugh. Come, dance, monkey, dance.
Yeah.
He's not in a set now. He's a serious guy in reality.
Yeah, sure. Yep. And most of the time, like sometimes people will say, oh, Stephen's not there's no way he's like this in real life. And I usually am, but I can't all the time. Like at some point it's like, okay, I got to just put my headphones on and work. That's what I got to do right now. So yeah, people are not black and white. They're gray. People have variations to them. It's never clean cut on how people just are. So yeah, it's interesting learning that in a work setting.
Yeah. It's not a very technical discussion at the moment, so I guess I better veer back to what our community comes here for. But
Sure.
We should have a second episode on management. People can contribute, get credits for their MBAs. McDonald's is asking if this webinar would be uploaded to YouTube. And in fact, we're live on YouTube right now. I have it running in a separate window. So yes, McDonald's, Elector TV is what you have to search on YouTube, and you can watch this live there now, or you can catch it in a replay later. Now, if we can have a bit of fun moving away from industry, well, from Lumen Pick and Place.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this Atlas arm. It's not only fun, it's practical and probably quite helpful to people. How did you get involved in this?
This was way back in college. So, oh gosh, I don't know, like literally 10 years ago now. I'm 29. Yeah, I'm 29. So there was a really cool grant at the school I went to, University of Connecticut, called the Idea Grant. And the idea was you would just pitch them some idea that you had. And if you got it, they'd give you $4,000 to just do it. and there had to be some kind of output of some capacity. And I was like, okay, this sounds like fun. And my friend Ross did it, and he said to me, hey, you got to do this, Stephen. Like, this is so cool. They'll just give you $4,000 to do something fun. And I was like, okay. And I had seen Enable, the company, at a lot of maker fairs. They have like a prosthetic hand that's fully 3D printed. There's no electronics, and it's for folks that don't have any fingers. They just kind of have their palm. So when you articulate your palm forward, assuming there's no fingers here, just mechanically, these 3D printed fingers would close. And it was really cool, but it was only for folks that don't have fingers and they just have a palm. And so I started thinking about, like many other people in this era, Open Bionics does a similar thing now with some electromyography sensors, which kind of detect the signal coming from your muscle through your skin. You just put these little stickers on. You can detect how hard you're tensing effectively. And it stood to reason with a little bit of Arduino work, you could make a prosthetic hand. And so I applied for the grant and I got it. And I went through the process of doing this. And my output was making YouTube videos. If you go to my YouTube channel, like way back 10 years ago, some of the earliest videos are me talking about this project, which was the output of this grant. And so I made a prototype and it was just horrible. Like, it barely did anything. It was just really bad. Yeah, Atlas Arm episode 1 prototyping. The first one is me geting my RFID chip implanted. That, you probably don't want to play that one. But yeah, here's little baby Stephen 10 years ago, no beard. With this crazy, on my Solidoodle 2 Pro, I printed this behemoth thing in this green filament. Like, it was just a whole endeavor. And then after I had a prototype, this was like 3 versions after this green thing, which was really just kind of playing around with CAD. It really wasn't trying to do anything real. Then I applied for another grant. It was actually a startup incubator, where if you get in, they write you a big old check and they put you through this like summer boot camp where they just put you through the paces of validating your business model. And it was one of the best summers of my life, like working in this program. It was called the ID, or not the ID grant. It was called IQ, Innovation Quest. Keith Fox, who's ex-CMO of Apple, helps fund it. It's an incredible program. It's also at Stanford. And so I came in second place at that, and I got a big check from that thing to fund development, and I made the next version. And went down that path. And I was going to, right out of college, try and start a prosthetics company doing this whole thing. And I had lab space and all this. And I talked to some other people in the industry about what it meant to go through all the FDA approval and stuff. And I realized it wasn't something I wanted to do. So I put the design up open and I moved on. And I went to go work for a couple companies and kind of cut my teeth in industry a little bit. But I ultimately based it on an amputee, and I 3D scanned his residual limb, and I like put the sensors baked into the mesh, and I printed it in NinjaFlex, and like it went onto his arm. It was really cool. He was really into doing like soldering on the electrical system in his car, but he has a prosthetic and it didn't work nearly the way he wanted to. So I actually made an attachment for his prosthetic that would automatically extrude solder at the joint of like a helping hands. So on the prosthetic was a helping hands with 2 alligator clips, and you would squeeze your muscle and there was a little extruder that would extrude solder at the joint. So his prosthetic was the helping hands device. It was really fun working on it. So that was just a lot of me figuring out what iteration and product development was in college, and getting some funding to pursue that and all that kind of stuff, and go to a startup incubator, which has helped me unspeakably in the whole Opulo journey as well.
And what goes into a startup incubator for our viewers who are watching? If you had to visit one, what would you expect?
It is a program where they are incredibly blunt and forward about if your idea doesn't make any sense. So you effectively go through the process of writing a business plan. They have you do elevator pitches. And that was my favorite part. I loved tuning a process of explaining what I'm doing and how that's going to go. I loved it so much. And they will cut you off. They are incredibly forward about, this doesn't make any sense. You don't know that for sure. Where are your numbers? Like really asking you to, put up or shut up about what you're claiming and all these prompts. It was a great, rigorous process from people who have been in industry, validating that what you're doing is actually going to make sense and potentially could work, and how to pitch to investors. It was great, which was really valuable when we were pitching to investors. So it's kind of like a really quick course on doing something like this, based around a specific idea that you have.
Excellent. And now we have 5 minutes to go, unfortunately. So
Wow.
if I could quickly move out of, let's bring this back up. You've got a flamethrower hand. Look,
Yep.
I tried to make a smoke thrower with a smoke bomb when I was a kid.
Cool.
It's a little ball and you light the fuse. Not cool. It was hot, actually. I held it with my thumb and I lit it, and I thought I'd make smoke come out. I got blisters from the side blast.
Oh man.
What was your experience like that on the flamethrower? It looks amazing.
This was really early Maker Faire stuff. It was a lot of fun. This was also figuring out how to take modules and break them down into a dedicated PCB. So this was a whole ARM mounted. I had old versions that were like mounted on the back. I think if you keep scrolling down, I might have pictures, if I did my job right, of like the super old versions. Do I have a picture? I don't know if I do. Yeah, this is all the newer version. Yeah. But again, taking Arduinos and modules and figuring out how to break it out into, this is a full custom PCB. There's a propane tank on the back. It actually has an integrated taser for ignition. So I could press a little button. The thing on my palm there is actually a milled PCB that has a switch. And when I press it, it triggers the taser, and it will light the fire automatically until some connection got loose, and then it just started to tase me when I would try and turn it on. So I'd try and light it, and I just get tased, and like I turn that feature off. But I've been thinking about making a new version.
It sounds like my smoke bomb. I wish I had mounted it on a PCB instead of right in my hand.
Yeah.
You've got some great stuff here. We won't have time to go through it all. StephenHawes.com for our audience who wants to check it out. Question from a reader is, when are we going to sell hard copies in India? Well, I'm not sure. But remember, we have a green subscription. You can always go to electromagazine.com and sign up for a print subscription. Get yourself a tablet, and you'll have hours and hours of reading. You also get 50 years of archive editions of Elector to go through. So that's great. Tell us about what's your favorite one here?
Oh man,
let me not choose for you.
The mask was cool.
I love the bow tie.
Yeah, the bow tie was cool too, but yeah, the mask is probably one of my favorites. There's a software called Pepakura where you take a 3D model and unwraps it into paper so you can make paper craft. But I was like, what if instead it was a PCB? So I milled out all the pieces that Pepakura unfolded of this face model, and I actually also put traces into it. So I unwrapped this model, milled the unwrapped model out of circuit boards with integrated traces. And then over the course of like 18 months, I painstakingly sanded down chamfers into every part, and I numbered all of them so I could line them up. You can see these are work in progress. That's a 3D print that I had for reference as I'm sanding and gluing together all of the pieces. And you can see some of the traces there over the bridge of the nose. And going through assembling all these pieces, gluing them all, I tried to solder them together, and it was just completely fraught. It did not work. But here's a better shot of the traces kind of traversing across some of the panels and figuring out how to get that to work. This is pretty simple. It's just a microcontroller and a couple individually addressable LEDs for the eyes. But oh man, this was months of work just trying to sand it and get it all together. And then at the end, you have this I got like printed a stand for it. Yeah, this is mostly whip of all the circuit. And it got so much oxidation over like the year and a half of working on it. But like, this is now the structure starting to come together. You can see the Sharpie came off, but the oxidation was still there. So I had a negative of all my little Sharpie marks for the what edges lined up to what. Yeah, it was painstaking. And then, I got, there it is all assembled. It's like full size. Like it does kind of fit on my face. And then sanded it down, put a microcontroller on it. There was only one bodge wire, which was pretty good. It was funny going back. I'm like, why isn't this spinning up? And it was a design I had done a year prior. So I was like, oh, that's a silly mistake, Stephen from 18 months ago. But at the end, it really came out to be a cool, I think I have a GIF of it working at the end. They're sanding it. And it's a cool piece. I'm really, there it is. I'm really proud of how it came out. I want to do more stuff like this. I love using PCBs for weird things.
Well, clearly what drew you to this was the profit motive, right? You must have made a killing on this.
Oh, so much money. I made so much. Oh yeah, I was featured in Hackspace, I believe. I was down quite a bit of money for this build, but that's one of my favorite pictures of it, backlit. But yeah, it was a really fun project. Definitely not about the money. Purely just it was something interesting I wanted to try. Yeah.
I just ordered. I've never etched a PCB in my life, but I just ordered some copper boards because I was hoping to do an experiment with a magnet that could slow the magnet down on a ramp. But it doesn't work. I think the board is too thin. The copper is too thin. So now
sure.
I'm just expecting the oxidation over the next 18 months. I guess. But that's a project I could maybe throw my time into and make millions from.
Sure, yeah. It's easy. Toss some hours into it, suddenly millions in your bank account.
Anyway, Stephen, we've reached our time limit, but before we go, been watching your development on GitHub, so not really many secrets because you're open source. Anything to tease that's upcoming?
We have a new iteration, huge jump in I'd say about a week. About a week it'll be out. So keep an eye out. Opulo.io. My YouTube channel is gonna have an announcement about it. So just keep your eyes peeled for new thing coming out. Again, not that many secrets. We're open source. We develop in the open. We don't play the game that way. Watch on Twitter and YouTube and all that stuff in about a week, and we have some cool stuff coming.
Well, you're open source, but I bet you your entire root drive on your PC is not publicly shared. So
yeah, look, we're open source, not open company. Yeah, we can't share HR and financial stuff for like legal reasons, but we like to be as transparent as we can.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Stephen, this has been a great conversation as always. You keep it going with your effervescence, if you will, your bubbliness.
Thank you, Brian.
Now you can recharge. As soon as the camera's off, you're just going to collapse, right?
No, I got a full day of work ahead of me, man. I got people to talk to. I got decisions to make. I'm no chilling.
That's right. It's 11 a.m. on the East Coast there, so I can't keep you for much longer. I want to thank our viewers who joined us from all around the world. We've got Jose Luis Barrera. Now, I'm guessing Brazil, maybe, or Portugal. I don't know. Play this guessing game with surnames. But thank you for joining us, Jose. And thank you for everyone who joined us for the great questions. And don't forget about our giveaway. It's the BeagleY AI kit. I'm not going to show you the page again because we have run out of time. We're 3 minutes late. I just want to say once again, thank you, Stephen, for joining us and entertaining us all. This was a great chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was great talking with you, Brian.
Awesome. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Have a good one. Elector TV is what you want to search on YouTube because we've got some lives coming up tomorrow. We have Lab Talk, but search for Elector TV. Thank you. And have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. Jose is from Panama, by the way. Cheers and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.